Welcome all for the fourth keynote of Theveli 2025. Thank you all for being here after a quite filling lunch. And I'm sure the talk you're going to listen to for the next 1 hour will definitely not put you to sleep. I can assure that. My name is Amnat Shiava, and I will be the moderator for this session. Once again, welcome to Theveli International Conference 2025 and the fourth keynote of this conference. Again, welcome you all for coming here and being with us. It is now my great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Scott Blair. Dr. Blair is the content developer editor at Sulitest Impact, based in Paris, France. His career has been dedicated to advancing sustainability, literacy, and building assessment frameworks that help higher education institutions embed sustainability into their teaching and learning. At Sulitest, Dr. Blair plays a pivotal role in developing tools and resources that measure and strengthen sustainability knowledge, empowering universities to prepare graduates who can respond to global challenges of our time. His work exemplifies the very mission of this conference, to align higher education with the urgent call for sustainable futures. Before I go on a little bit, I'd like to add a personal note to this session, because this session holds really meaning to me. I met Scott 4 years ago at one of our INCAHE conferences. And at that time, too, I could see how persistent he was with his ideas about incorporating sustainability into higher education. But from where I was coming from at that time, I didn't listen much. I'm sorry. But this year, when we went to the INCAHE conference, we knew what we were doing. We went with a mission because we wanted to talk to you because we had started incorporating sustainability practices into our university. So 4 years ago, it may not have been our time, but now it's our time. And definitely this is our time now to listen to his keynote on Rays of Hope, assessing and building sustainability knowledge across higher education. Over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. So, can you hear me? Sounds about right? Everyone can hear me? All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Amina. Very appreciate that, and to the entire leadership of Maldives National University, to all the very kind people as well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here and to have this opportunity to share some of my ideas and some of my work on how we build sustainability knowledge across higher education into the ethos and outcomes of education all across the board. So let me just give you a quick overview of what we're going to try to accomplish here today. A three-part presentation, at least two of which I promise to complete. The first one is just to quickly look at the landscape of sustainability teaching and learning in higher education. This might sound like really the core of the presentation, but in many ways it's not. My premise here is that, in fact, we have a great deal of work still ahead of us to change the landscape of teaching and learning in higher education. The first part of my presentation actually is maybe a little bit alarming, pessimist. Dr. Ruger is not with us as well. He's always trying to tell me to be more optimistic, but we'll see how this progresses over time. Secondly, then, I want to share with you some new and some exciting psychometric data on student knowledge of sustainability and the SDGs, the result of a new assessment tool that Sulitest Impact has recently developed and is now deploying. And then afterwards, the third part, I have a number of resources, articles, presentations that can, again, help all of you in your own pathway towards building sustainability into your teaching and learning processes. So get ready for my first slide. This is a bit of a shock. I didn't choose this because I was coming to the Maldives. I've been using this slide for quite a number of years, but it's a bit of a challenge for people living on a low-lying island nation. So I think this 2030 well-known cartoon by Graham McKay, recently updated, as you see, since we've had elections in the United States, this really captures the big picture of the nature and the urgency of the threats we face here today on planet Earth. And speaking you, obviously, from the Maldives, a country with an average ground elevation of about 1.5 meters, about 4 feet, I think an image such as this is actually more terrifying than comical, particularly after the devastation you suffered in the 2004 tsunami. Plus, for the island nation you are, such an image also suggests other more hidden environmental and ecological consequences and challenges such as sea level rise, ocean acidification, sea temperature warming, coral bleaching, overfishing, species depletion, biodiversity loss, plastic pollution, and striving for sustainable tourism, to mention just a few. But looking at this image as higher education professionals is also daunting and a challenge, because I think this picture also suggests the enormity of the cognitive, attitudinal, and behavioral change we need to produce in our students if the human experiment is to continue in any sort of civilized way in the 21st century. As educators, we must get better at teaching our species why these waves are rising, what will happen when they break, who is primarily responsible for causing them, and what we need to do as a society to stop agitating the waters and start regenerating our planetary home. So as my question asks here, how should educators respond? I think we should respond with alarm, with urgency, and with a thought that no other learning outcome could ever be more important than this one, helping our species understand, appreciate, and remedy our global systemic structural crisis, whatever the discipline our students might be in. Because this is indeed what we have. What we face is more than just a climate crisis or a global health crisis. It's a global systemic structural crisis that is degrading Earth's 5 natural systems of the lithosphere, the land, of which you have very little, I concede, the hydrosphere, water, of which you have a great deal, cryosphere, none at all, atmosphere, like everyone else, but most importantly, the biosphere. What we have is a perfect storm of peak population, peak carbon emissions, oil, urbanization, consumerism that is now degrading biodiversity, cultural diversity, global human health, and simple human happiness and well-being. In short, human activity really is out of sync with nature, what the Earth can provide for us and what it can absorb from us in terms of human-generated waste. We are living beyond our means, and Mother Earth is furious, and she's coming to collect her debt. So just look at how much and for how long we as a species have been behaving poorly as Earth citizens. In this graph, we chart the history of what people extract from planet Earth, ecological footprint, the red line, against what the Earth can provide, biocapacity, or the green line. In short, this chart shows us the quantity of nature that we humans use and compares it to how much nature we humans have. A biocapacity deficit results when the ecological footprint of consumption exceeds biocapacity. And as you see, the human race has become a deficit ecological spender all the way back in the early 1970s. And the gap between what the Earth can provide and what we are extracting from it has widened ever since. Indeed, in terms of the number of planet Earths we would need every year to sustain this frenzy of production and consumption, Homo sapiens is now consuming the resources of 1.78 Earths every year. And this is just the global average. If everyone consumed like, for instance, we do in the United States, of which I am a citizen, we'd need over 5 planet Earths. If we lived as someone from China, 2.5 Earths. And again, Professor Brugger is not here as well. If we lived as a German, we would have to have 2.8 Earths. And indeed, what is the global picture here? Here's a look at the world's biocapacity creditors in green and all of the debtors that are in red. An ecological deficit occurs when the ecological footprint of a population exceeds the biocapacity of the area available to that population. A national ecological deficit means that the country is net importing biocapacity through trade, liquidating national ecological assets, or emitting more carbon dioxide waste into the environment than the ecosystem can absorb. Alas, I can't give you the footprint here for the Maldives. Your country is one of the few that does not have this data included in the Global Carbon Footprint Network website. But I recommend that you take a look at it. It's really quite interesting. But the situation is worse than just tallying up who's doing good and who's not. In terms of climate justice, here's a map that shows which countries are most responsible for excess carbon emissions that cause the climate crisis and collapse of biodiversity. Countries in shades of red in the top map. It then shows which countries are and will be most impacted by excess emissions. Countries shaded in red in the bottom map. And this, I can say, the Maldives is definitely shaded in red. We see that those countries that created the problem have a huge carbon-induced debt to those countries least responsible for, but most impacted by, the climate crisis. And we know that climate justice is about who pays the bills and lends a hand for all the current and coming loss and damage to people and places that didn't create this mess. Of course, we have a judge with us here as well, so when we speak more about climate justice, we can refer as well to Malcolm as well in his talk yesterday. Indeed, make no mistake, climate justice requires an immediate and sustained redistribution of resources from those in the north to those in the south. This in turn suggests that we need an altogether new teaching and learning agenda for those on whom the responsibility for dispensing climate justice depends, the wealthy and educated in the global north. Now here's another way to see the problem. The big picture here is that the global north's share of responsibility for emitting more than their fair share of CO2 emissions is about 92%, shaded in dark green, compared to the 8% responsibility of the global south, shaded in light green. Note the 40% responsibility again for my country, the United States alone. This has huge implications, I believe, for what the global north can and should be doing to help the global south prepare for and pay for the hardships coming their way. Higher education should teach to this reality that students from around the world, but particularly from the global north, understand and embrace the moral implications of this historical trend so that they can carry out their corresponding social responsibilities. In many ways, I believe students here in Mali and in the Maldives have a huge opportunity and a firsthand experience to help many of us in the global north recognize what are the costs of our production and consumption habits in the north. It is the destruction of countries and peoples like you and your own. So here's still another way to look at the problem. The Sustainable Development Index, or SDI, measures the ecological efficiency of human development. It recognizes that social and economic development must be achieved within planetary boundaries. And it was created to update the Human Development Index of the 1990s that tended to praise and reward countries who took perhaps good care of their own population, but at the expense of the environment and other peoples. Alas, again, the Maldives aren't included in this framework either, but if it were, from the statistics I have seen, I think the Maldives would be performing quite positively and quite highly here. And finally, here's another way to suggest how little teaching and learning about the environment, ecology, and planetary boundaries seems to be taking on planet Earth through either formal or informal education. You may be familiar with this framework on the right. This is from the Stockholm Resilience Center on the 9 planetary boundaries. Anyone familiar with this framework? They have quite a lovely website that I encourage you to visit. And what you see on the right simply are the 9 planetary boundaries. And they're listed there in dark: land system change, freshwater change, biogeochemical flows, ocean acidification, pollution, ozone depletion, climate change, of course, biodiversity, and novel entities or chemical pollution. And what you see is in the middle, the green area, that is the safe operating space where humans need to be operating across all of our industrial economic processes. Once we go beyond that gray area, we then are into a danger zone, risking tipping ourselves into a climate or an environmental crisis. And you see, of course, in orange, how many of these planetary boundaries we have now exceeded. 6 planetary boundaries have now been officially crossed in 2023. And you see how quickly we have moved from 2009 through 2015. We are racing towards catastrophe. But surely we know that the climate crisis is a real problem, and once we alert everyone through, say, educational programs, conversations with faculty, administrators, university leaders, quality assurance professionals, we will find ways to change our behaviors and work together to find solutions. Alas, this chart shows the rising trends in both CO2 concentrations and rising average global temperature change, and then plots this against the environmental and climate accords and agreements that we have signed up since the 1980s. In short, this chart says the climate crisis upon us today, we knew this was coming 40 years ago. 40 years ago. And despite our best efforts ever since to do something about it at the intergovernmental level and through education, we've had little impact on addressing, much less mitigating, the problems we face. If anyone remembers, the film came out a couple years ago, Don't Look Up. This is sort of a don't look up sort of movement. More to the point, of course, is what do we do as educators to try to stop this trend and try to demonstrate a new pathway forward. So the recent February 2022 IPCC report confirms that things, in fact, are not going well. I told you I wasn't bringing lots of good news in this first part of my presentation here, and that we are simply not doing enough as humans, as educators, as economists, as people in media, as health professionals, across the disciplines. We all need to find ways to work together to change these trends. So here you see, it's definitely warming. It's definitely us that's causing it. We're sure about the science. Listening to the students this morning, we're sure about the science. We know it's bad, but if you look at the last one, there is still hope. We can fix it. There's still time to act, but deep, sustained, and immediate reductions of CO2 emissions must take place in advance of the target 2030 date set by the United Nations. So this troubling sentiment that you see listed here up above, we know there's a problem, but we don't seem to care, inspired the writing of this recent 2023 report in Australia. And as you can see, the first part of this says that just over a few decades, scientific research has enabled unprecedented advances in our understanding of Earth's climate processes. Anyone working, as we've seen, and the students researching here over the last several days at this conference, are doing excellent work in explaining exactly what's happening, who's causing these problems, what are the impacts, what are the impacts on human health and the welfare of society. But if you read in yellow there, this is the more pertinent and more troubling aspect here. The writing of this report, its impetus comes instead from the observation that developments in society's knowledge of climate change have not been matched by our efforts to develop, update, coordinate, and disseminate educational initiatives in the general domain of climate, environment, and sustainability. Now, I'll be glad to share this poster with you on another occasion. You may recognize this from the past as well, but this reality of how much we know about what's happening on planet Earth, but how little we're teaching and learning about it, led me to do a quick research poster on quality assurance and accreditation. I simply went through and looked at all of the accreditation regimes in Europe and North America and a lot of global standards, and looked at what actually they require universities to present in terms of evidence of what they're doing in sustainability. And the sad result of this research was that, in fact, there are very few requirements that accreditation agencies and quality assurance agencies impose upon universities to demonstrate a meaningful commitment to sustainable development. The truth, which was my conclusion here, is that colleges, universities, and particularly business schools won't seriously address the climate crisis the collapse of biodiversity, and the SDGs until accrediting agencies require them to do so. We need to work with our accrediting agencies, our quality assurance professionals, to begin changing our standards, embedding and integrating very rigorous requirements on SDG reporting as a mark of quality education. So what is hindering higher educational institutions from doing more? Well, here's the results of a ASHE, the American Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, a report that came out, as you see, in 2020, that simply asked, what are the hindrances? And you can see them there. Structural barriers, lack of time, lack of financial resources. I'm sure these all look very familiar to you as struggles that all institutions face. But again, if accreditation agencies required more of us through formal standards and indicators, we would respond. We would find the evidence. We would change our priorities. We would find the resources. And of course, we know that the students are very much interested in this topic. We've seen this today and yesterday here at this conference, the number of student research projects focused on climate change and the welfare of the biosphere. So I'll let you read any of these statistics that you wish. But you see that great numbers of students are concerned about their future. They're willing to give up salary and money to get a job that works in a company that values sustainability. They say that they're not getting enough sustainability teaching and learning in their courses. They don't want a single course, they want it embedded across the curriculum. And many report that some students are going through higher education institutions and receiving essentially no formal training, education in what's taking place on planet Earth. So this, again, is a sign of where we should be going. We should, in this sense, be following the student impulse to prepare for the future, their futures. People of my age, I don't really count anymore, but our students who are in their 20s, they need the type of education so they can find the types of jobs that will respond to these problems and be recognized as such. And even the employers are becoming more and more aware of their role in this as well, recognizing that they need students that have these types of sustainability skills, systemic thinking, an awareness of the integrated nature of systems and processes and peoples in a globalized world. Sustainability competencies, as defined, for instance, by UNESCO, gives very clear definitions of what types of cognitive thinking skills are needed: critical thinking, futures thinking, systemic thinking, competency-based thinking. So the employers are concerned about this as well. So these are my conclusions then to part one, as you see. Science has been hugely successful in explaining what is taking place and how the natural world works, the nature of planetary boundaries, and the negative impact that we humans are having upon it. But secondly, that we have the existential Earth crisis that we have is evidence of just how little education over the last 75 years has succeeded in transferring that scientific knowledge to our students so that we can have solutions and practical responses for the welfare of humanity. So in response, educators are now changing what they're doing. And this is really my appeal here today, is that we need to change what we are doing, find new pathways forward, question our business as usual practices, and become creative and imaginative in what we begin to prepare for tomorrow. And to do this, I think what we need to do is focus a little bit on the importance of change. I submit to you that we educators could become bolder in the kind of change we seek through our many teaching and learning processes. I think this three-part typology of change you see is elegant, simple, as a way to think about the varieties of change and how much change we really want. I really like about this triptych is the first one that says, doing things better. The second one, doing better things. And the third one, seeing things differently. This is both easy to grasp and remember and is elegant in its simplicity. It is easy to apply at various actor levels, individuals, groups, institutions. It also reveals how deceptive the notion of change can be. All change is not equal. There are important distinctions, many of which will lead us to greenwashing and to self-deception if we are not careful. One case, for instance, conformative renovation, for example, results essentially in just tidying things up without altering assumptions, without altering power structures, without changing basic outcomes. If you were to think about this in terms of cars, for instance, the example of this first box would be, for instance, let's have more fuel-efficient cars. Good example of conformative change. A second case, progressive reformative innovation, questions whether better alternatives are at hand. Think electric cars. That's something better. That's something more interesting. The third case, radical transformative refoundation, envisions, however, an altogether different way to live, think, and be. Think, and this might be appropriate as well, having walked around the city of Maldives a little bit over the last couple of days. Think self-sustaining and walkable eco-villages, interconnected via efficient and accessible public transport. What a nice thing to invent and create and change towards that. Indeed, each case reflects a sort of a paradigm shift across the first anthropocentric, essentially human-centric vision of change. Second one, really sort of biocentric, focused more on sort of the welfare of life. But thirdly, ecocentric mindsets focuses far more on the welfare of the holistic earth in all of its complexity. What we need is a new mindset. So indeed, this is the type of transformational change that I think higher education should begin to seek in the future. So let's now move on here to some psychometric data that I promised you in the next 10 minutes here to learn a little bit more about what students know about sustainability in all of its various manifestations. And we do this at a company called Sulitest. And I know, you're familiar with Sulitest and have become a friend of ours over the years. Sulitest, our mission is to enable institutions to mainstream sustainability literacy. We achieve this by designing online measures and tools to improve sustainability knowledge. We have, for instance, recently launched in 2023 a new assessment tool called TASK, the Assessment of Sustainability Knowledge, an 80-minute online 112 multiple choice questionnaire, which results in a micro-credential that certifies the student scores. Since 2023, we have delivered over 50,000 Sulitest task tests within some 80-plus institutions located in 18 countries and involving over 160 nationalities. And as you see, we part with a number of institutions and bodies and associations that also have a stake in quality education, institutional accreditation agencies, university rankings, and ratings. And our flagship tool, TASK, is designed to provide institutions like yours with reliable and comparable data to assess and monitor the progress of their students in their learning, to inform institutional strategy, and to foster sustainability learning and demonstrate impact to institutional stakeholders, both internal to the institution and external. Sulitest also partners with a number of research institutions as well. We are currently working at the European level with an organization called BioFin to help essentially business schools begin to reinvent the way in which they teach business and finance courses in ways that are more sustainable and more focused on nature-based solutions. So in passing, let me clarify that TASK assesses only knowledge about sustainability within the larger construct of sustainability literacy. Sustainability literacy is a three-part construct. As you see, includes knowledge, mindset, and skills. However, to ensure that we are generating valid and reliable psychometric data about sustainability, We purposely limit ourselves to designing a test that measures only cognitive knowledge. So this remains objective. Each of the questions has 4 options, 3 of which are factually incorrect, 1 answer that is factually correct. There we go. And every year in July, we publish a report to the UN High-Level Political Forum, of which we are a member, that reveals the major trends of the past academic year. And this report that you can find online will provide much more data than I can provide you here today. I encourage you to take a look at this at your leisure. But let's look at some of these findings now so that we have this first vision of what students actually know about sustainability. So for the academic year 2024-25, and after cleaning and filtering some of the data, our analysis here uses a sample of 20,000 assessments with 161 nationalities in 18 countries. The adjusted average score is 56.95 with a normal distribution. And while the detailed 2-decimal score is calculated according to several internal discrete variables within the model, the score does roughly reflect the number of questions answered correctly out of 100. So keep this point in mind. This is where students stand today on average across the globe, demonstrating a mastery of roughly half the knowledge they need to understand and appreciate the nature and stakes of sustainability. Let's move forward and break this down a little bit. Looking at average scores across the 3 frameworks within the task matrix, while they are quite close, Earth systems, human welfare, and levers of opportunity, these are the 3 major frameworks of task. It is noteworthy that knowledge is the lowest, concerning both how our planet works and the impact we humans are having upon this. Keep this in mind, that Earth systems is among the lowest. But to see more specifically the types of subjects that are assessed within task, here's the whole list of the 28 different types of subjects, each one assigned to one of the 3 frameworks, either Earth systems, human welfare, or levers of opportunity, or levers of action. These are where the solutions, the pathways, and technology, and thinking, and cognitive growth are assessed and tested within task under these categories that you see right here. So for Earth systems, students know relatively more about climate change, ocean acidification, land system change, and freshwater use. Whereas for biodiversity integrity, biogeochemical flows, aerosols loading, and ozone depletion, they know less. In human welfare, they score highest in health, income, gender equality, nutrition, and education, but score lower in energy, social equity, access to water, housing, and human settlements. And in levers of opportunity, scores highest in infrastructure, planning, and natural resource management, but lower in laws, policies, and institutions. And there you see the highest and lowest scores per framework. And depending upon the disciplines you all work in or teach in, you can begin to look at these and see which ones are most pertinent and most relevant to you. Now, we also disaggregate this data according to the SDGs as well, and this is particularly important for institutions or programs that are branding courses or programs according to the SDGs. So we see that SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 6, clean water, SDG 3, health and well-being, and SDG 2, zero hunger, have the highest average scores, whereas SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, and SDG 7, access to energy, industry, innovation, score lower. So this, again, gives us good benchmarks upon which we can then begin to compare our students from one cohort to the next, from one year to the next. Now, it's also interesting to dig into the students' academic majors here as well. The trends show that students in environmental and sustainability studies generally demonstrate higher scores. This is no great surprise. Followed closely by those in engineering and mathematics and the hard sciences and understanding of physical principles. Then come the social sciences, health and medicine, and interesting, lowest comes the business students and the business studies. We can also look at how different disciplines perform across the different frameworks. we see that students from environmental and sustainable studies score highest in earth systems and human welfare frameworks, whereas students in the social sciences and business studies score the highest in human welfare. We also might note that students in engineering and mathematical studies, perhaps those students very much focused on solutions, problem solving, score significantly lower in levers of opportunity. We also at Sulitest strongly recommend that using task is useful when it is used in an entry and exit framework, which allows educators to track progress within their cohorts over time. For both bachelor and master students, average exit scores exceed entry scores, showing a general increase from testing 1 to testing 2 time periods, with a continuum of average scores increasing from bachelor entry and master entry through exit. And we as well have disaggregated the data so that we can study how people test and whether they improve or weaken from test 1 or test 2, whether they stay in the top 25%, whether they shift from one quartile to another quartile in this Sankey diagram. And this distribution curves also compare student scores with staff and faculty scores. Task is not just for students. Task can also be used to test your faculty, to test your staff, to test your alumni and stakeholders, and various university partners. This is interesting. As expected, faculty scores are generally higher. It is important to acknowledge a self-selection basis. Many of the faculty members that took task were dedicated to deploying task within their institutions. It may be that the more well-knowledgeable faculty members tested using the task instrument. And there we see that the five highest scores among the faculty: housing and human settlements, cognitive capacity, sustainability, ocean acidification, basic income, and microeconomics. Lowest scores in transformative change, energy, biosphere integrity, access to networks, and air pollution. So again, I will leave it to you to discover these detailed statistics and bar graphs in the larger report, but we also do collect data on alumni feedback as well, so that we can upskill students, upskill the professionals who are already in the working world. So again, I will leave it to you in the report to study the way in which alumni perform in task. And then finally, several last slides here as well, linking teaching activities to high-impact learning. Because learning is a complex, ongoing, and multifactored process, data such as this provided helps institutions really understand what mix of learning activities is most impactful for learning outcomes among our students. Let me bring them all up there. There they are. We can see here that different types of learning activities, a mix of learning activities, give different outcomes. Some students perform better when they have service learning, when they have an internship, when they have a specific course. So this helps institutions then begin to calculate which mix of learning activities, curricular and co-curricular, lends itself best to learning. So the key takeaways here, I think, are important. At the global level, this is truly a unique data set, now available on planet Earth, for institutions to begin to use as a benchmark to compare how their own students perform based upon their culture, their institutional priorities, their curriculum, and the structure of their co-curricular programs. It provides visibility over our progression towards the 2030 agenda. It becomes really a global standard that institutions can use to become more highly performing and can compete more effectively internationally. At the institutional level, institution-specific data, of course, is even more valuable and actionable. Imagine if your institution, for instance, had this data across your disciplines, across your departments and colleges, and could then break this data down into its more actionable parts. So entry-exit data helps reveal teaching, institutional impact. Cohort comparisons reveal who's learning what best. Embedding sustainability across the curriculum works best. So what we know, and I will conclude on this so we have some time for some questions, of course, is that we now know that students actually do know quite a lot about sustainability. This is impressive. We should applaud ourselves for the efforts we've made. But from the first part of my presentation, you will recall that we still have an Earth crisis on our hands. We still need to double our efforts to find more impactful teaching and learning ways to upskill and improve the learning, the knowledge, and that, of course, will have a huge impact on students' values, competencies, and behaviors as well, because, again, task focuses only on knowledge. Building a sustainable future requires lifelong learning and action that is measurable, and improving data scores year on year is the new metric of a quality education. So my message actually is one of hope, and I will conclude on this point. Yes, we have a challenge before us, but we've seen with the students here today and yesterday, they are dedicated to building a sustainable future. They are developing the research tools and methodologies to reinforce the types of changes that we need to make as a species to stop degrading our planet and build a sustainable future. Tools like this provides data that can help inform that process and lead us, hopefully, to a place of hope, a place of sustainability, a place of love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. You've given a lot to think about, and I'm sure everybody is processing this and thinking about questions to ask. For the audience, we have about 15 minutes to ask a few questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and our team will provide you with a mic. Yes. Please do try to keep the question short. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you very much, Professor Scott, for the very enlightening presentation, updating us on the current status, situation, and the future consequences of climate change. I am a lecturer of politics and policy of sustainable development, and I'm really impressed by the presentation. Now the question. We, the Maldives, are seen as the best laboratory for climate change, especially the twin dangers, one of the twin dangers, which is sea level rise. And you were on the beach of Mafuti last night, and you see how vulnerable we are. Of course, Guinness Book of World Records says we are the lowest lying nation above sea level and prime victim to be the consequences, to face the consequences of climate change. Now, you have rightly said 40% United States is responsible for the breakdown of the climate change. So what can we do? The small island states or the AOCs holds about 1/5 of voting power in the United Nations, but this vulnerable group is hard to make United States listen to the plight of an island states. So what can we do to, especially now Trump administration, to listen to the scientists and the vulnerable endangered climatically endangered states of island states in the world?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, a very pertinent and difficult question, and I'm not sure my answer is going to be very satisfying on this. But I do think, just in my few days here, and this is the first time I've been to the Maldives, I mean, this country and what you're doing, this is at the front line of the climate crisis and of the larger Earth crisis. This is the laboratory in which we are going to succeed or fail to find pathways forward. I think an institution like yours here has the opportunity, and you're already, of course, doing this, but to educate an entire population that has a science-based, evidence-based understanding of where we are, how we got here, and what we need to get out of here. Find a solution. And if we do that on the principles of justice and fairness and equality, that are principles that ostensibly countries like the United States support, this is a powerful message, because you are living the reality of it long before many other peoples are. So you are experiencing it. You are just as human as everyone else on this planet. It's not because you're a small country that you don't matter. I think there's a message that you have to send to the world from the front lines of climate change and sea level rise, that this is a global problem and we can only solve it if we work together. We need this form of transformative change. We need to see the world differently so that we can not act as a Maldivian or an American or a French or a Brit, but we act as a human being, part of a species that is collectively responsible for this. If the other species, I heard all of the wonderful talks this morning from the turtles and the sharks and the mollusks and the crabs that we saw last night on the beach, if they could speak to us, they would be furious. But we should listen to them as well, just as the large states need to listen to the small states, because we are in this together. That is my response.
Thank you, Scott. We have three. So we start from you, sir.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. And I would like to especially thank you for giving us a long list of takeaways, which we normally don't find in lectures. But while taking away one of the points that you have mentioned at the last subsection, building a substantial future requires lifelong learning. Government of India has, I'm from India, Government of India has formulated new education policy. And in the new education policy, one's principal focus is on drawing on from the past to create a sustainable future. I would like to know your take on that. And in our country, as well as in many developing and poor countries, the problem is there is huge dropout in education. Then you are talking of lifelong education. How do you match this dropout and lifelong education? And thirdly, you are talking of actions which are measurable. What kind of actions you are talking of, which you can measure to find out whether we are creating a sustainable future? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think as well, at the educational level, the focus today obviously is on higher education. I am speaking to you as a higher educator because this is my profession, this is a field, this is my network. You are the people I know and have contact with. But I sometimes feel like it's too late. I should be in elementary school or primary school. We need to teach the kids when they're very, very young to build in these attitudes and these values from a very early age. We already find that many students come into higher education without a background in sustainability learning, and we have to start from scratch. Many of them have habits that are going to be very hard to change, not to mention the people that are 30 or 40 or 50 years old or people my age. So I think we have to have a national strategy on this from primary all the way through and have sustainability education be really a major part of the learning outcomes across the board. And in terms of action that is measurable, this is difficult. It's easier to measure knowledge, and again, that's what TASK does. And at the moment at Sulitest, we have not developed tools to measure behaviors or values or actions. That really is very much more up to the professorial core, who is watching students act within service learning, community-based projects, internships, obviously work-based types of learning platforms. So those are the types of actions that also need to be measured as well. There's really not a psychometric tool to do that, but at least we have one now on knowledge that gives us a foundation upon which we can then begin to evaluate those values and those behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for that response. We'll take a question from over here.
Professor, thank you for an insightful lecture. My question is, why do you think awareness and care for sustainability issues is higher among the younger generations?
Awareness?
Awareness and care for sustainability issues. Why do you think that it is high with younger generations?
I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear the very last part. Where?
Why do you think it's high with the younger generations that we have a care for?
Oh, why is it higher now? Okay, my apologies. Yes, higher.
Thank you.
I guess I think the younger generation, and those among you who are here, I can't speak for you, but I think the younger generation is very fearful for their future and very much worried about what types of jobs they're going to have. Are they going to have some sort of social security, particularly here in the Maldives? Are they actually even going to have a country above water? I think this is what perhaps is driving more of an emotional response, an affective response. I think one of the points I'm trying to make here today is we know what the problem is. We know what's causing the problem. This is not a problem of not having knowledge. We need, yes, to measure it so we know what gaps we need to focus on. But I think the real solution and the real pathway forward is develop a different sense of being, of who we are, how we relate with the world around us, how we fit into the world of nature, so that we don't see ourselves as something separate and distinct from nature, independent of nature, but we are totally dependent upon it, a part of it, interconnected. And I think that's an awareness that comes a little bit out of, yes, fear, concern, alarm, the need to find solutions that older generations have not yet found the commitment and the ability to put into place. So I think their awareness is well placed and should be an indicator to the rest of us in positions of authority and education to begin to change and shift what we prioritize for what constitutes a quality education. I think a quality education for them is one that is going to sustain a world in which they can live in dignity and basic decency that much of science is saying is going to be very problematic for a great number of people, even more than now. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We'll take one last question from
Yeah, thank you for the very inspiring and enlightening presentation and lecture. So my question is actually regarding a research that I did in MNU related to higher education for sustainability. So one thing I learned is that there is this psychological barrier amongst our students that individual action are actually insignificant in terms of, facing or addressing these kind of global threats and global sustainability issues. And there is this perceived powerlessness in students. So how are we going to address that in terms of empowering our students?
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good question. Well, of course, this is a challenge that we all face because we all have environmental choices and consumer choices that we make every day. I've been using a number of plastic bottles here since I came to the Maldives. Can I stop using plastic bottles? Yes. Am I really believing that if I do that, that will really solve the problem? No. We've just seen the plastic convention just more or less collapsed several days ago. We don't have now a binding, ambitious treaty internationally on plastics that we need. So yes, I think the structural problem, because this is about power, this is about major sources of influence. We need intergovernmental action. We need state action. We need leadership at the national level and at the international level. And we, I believe, are sorely lacking at that at the moment. But I don't think that allows us, nevertheless, to ignore the personal responsibility. Because what we want governments to do is actually to legislate in ways that we don't use single-use plastics, that they're no longer available. You can't use plastic bags or plastic bottles. They've been outlawed. At which case, we would then have to learn how to survive without them, finding alternative means and methods. We're going to have to change our behavior individually anyway. Let's start learning how to do that. But let's also bring pressure to bear upon governmental structures so that more important structural, institutional responses are also put into place that support those, validate those, and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I think we have to close the Q&A for now because that way we will have time for the next session. But before we close off, I would like to respectfully invite our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Aishat Shehnaz Adam, to present a token of appreciation for Dr. Scott Blair in recognition of their valuable contribution and for generously sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today and being part of Theveli 2025.